On 24th February 2022, the news of Russia launching its invasion of Ukraine was widely spread all over the world. According to reports, the Russian leader Vladimir Putin's initial goal is to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, claiming that he is doing so to defend people from the Ukrainian government 8 years of bullying and genocide, just to be revealed later that the real purpose was to overrun Ukraine and depose its government. As both Russia and Ukraine are major commodity producers, this war is expected to have implications for the global economy, resulting in slower growth and higher prices. According to the International Monetary Fund (IMF), the interruption have resulted in higher global prices, particularly for oil and natural gas, and food shortage in Asia caused by the increased dependence on rice rather than wheat. It warned that high-priced food and energy imports would raise consumer prices, but that subsidies and price ceiling for fuel, food, and fertilizers may reduce the immediate impact of a budget cut. This is what we call inflation. Before we go into the main issues and effects that lead to inflation caused by the Ukrainian-Russian war, let's recap the definition of inflation. Inflation is a situation where the prices continuously increase over a given period of time. It is typically defined as a broad measure, such as the overall increase in prices or the cost of living in a country. Among the impacts of inflation are that it reduces the purchasing power of each unit of currency, causing prices of goods and services to rise over time. However, situations beyond the government's control, such as unemployment, declining currency values, and political tension can cause inflation to surge. It is the responsibility of the government to carry out its task of correctly establishing price stabilization measures. One of the impacts from the Russia-Ukraine war that leads to inflation is the lack of planting supplies, such as fertilizers, wheat, and corn, which are commonly imported from Russia and Ukraine. According to a statistic conducted by an American multinational investment management and financial services company named Morgan Stanley, both Russia and Ukraine exports 28% of fertilizers made from nitrogen and phosphorus as well as potassium. The war has caused disruption towards the shipment, which leads to the massive increase in the price of fertilizers. When the price of fertilizers increase, the price of agriculture items is also risen sharply amid fears of shortages, such as the shortages of grain that will increase the cost of basic food and other commodities that lead to a higher cost of resources to produce everything from grains, wheat, and corn. As a result, farmers have to bear high costs in producing planting supplies. Farmers who are not able to pay for the cost will have to stop producing, and those who will still want to produce have to increase the price of the planting supply in order to survive. Therefore, supply decreases and inflation occurs. Other than that, the war can lead to an increase in the cost of traveling. It is stated that due to a shortage of flights coming home, the UK Foreign Office altered its travel advice on February 28 to advise against any travel to Russia. It had previously only issued warnings against visiting its border with Ukraine and certain southern districts. Due to the sudden notice, travelers that had planned to travel to these affected places might have to cancel their plan. This will cause them to bear the high traveling costs because of the unavailability of the travel insurance plans to cover the cost for interrupted, cancelled, or delayed trips, as most travel insurance plans exclude their service from acts of war. Apart from that, following the 2014 tragedy of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, which was shot down over eastern Ukraine, commercial flights are no longer willing to fly over conflict zones. However, even on routes that do not travel near the region, airline fuel costs are expected to climb as a result of massive spike in oil prices caused by the conflict, with the differences reflected in ticket pricing and airstays over much of Eastern Europe is considered at risk, including Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova, in addition to Ukraine. Most airlines have to take different routes that take a longer distance to arrive at their destination countries, thus will lead to the increase in fuel costs and decrease in the amount of available planes to travel. Therefore, the price of airline tickets will continue to rise and slowly decrease the amount of travelers, and airline companies would not be able to gain profit. Another impact of this Russia-Ukraine war is the failure of global supply chain and logistic operations. Before the war, Ukraine exported roughly 6 million tons of agricultural products to countries in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa on a monthly basis. Only roughly 15 to 20% of this tonnage can now be exported through rail, the Danube River, and trucks as Russian ships and sea miles block Ukrainian Black Sea ports. Sanctions imposed by numerous trade partners and banks have increased the trade rates associated with Russian exports. This resulted in price hikes and supply chain disruption, putting food security in poor importing countries at risk. As there are disruptions for Ukraine and other countries in supplying agricultural products, as they need to cater their own needs first, a lot of countries that depend on these supplying countries are affected, including our country Malaysia, which decreases their food production as we are not able to import significant food from abroad. This resulted in a lack of supply of food. Therefore, the price of the available food right now increased rapidly, thus leading to food inflation. Furthermore, as several countries face inflation in terms of planting supply, traveling costs, and food supply, it will also affect the interest rate level. The higher the inflation rate, the more interest rates are likely to rise. This occurs because lenders will demand higher interest rates as compensation for the decrease in purchasing power of the money they are paid in the future. When inflation is rising and economic growth is fasting, the central bank may raise the interest rate to stimulate the economy. On top of that, inflation can also affect investment. Assets with fixed long-term cash flows perform poorly because the purchasing value of those future cash payments decreases over time. Commodities and assets with changeable cash flows, such as property rental income, on the other hand, tend to fare better as inflation rises. Fixed income securities, such as bonds, treasuries, and CDs, are typically purchased by investors who want a stable income in the form of interest payments. However, because most fixed income assets have the same interest rate until maturity, the buying power of interest payment decreases as inflation rises. As a result, as inflation rises, bond prices tend to fall. Usually, when inflation occurs, there are three different measures that can be used to control inflation. The first measure is monetary measures. Federal government implements a variety of policies and procedures to regulate economic activity. One of the most prominent ways for the government to control inflation is through monetary policy. The central bank raises the rate of interest on commercial bank borrowings as part of its monetary policy. As a result, commercial banks raise their interest rates on consumer loans. Individuals prefer to save money rather than invest in new companies in such a climate. The second measure is fiscal policy. A government can apply contractionary fiscal policy in the face of rising inflation and other expansionary signals, even to the point of producing a brief recession in order to restore economic equilibrium. The government accomplishes this through raising taxes, lowering government spending, and reducing public sector wages and jobs. The third measure is price control. It comes in two forms, which are price floors and price ceilings. The minimum prices for goods and services are known as price floors, which are set by the government or, in some situations, by the producers themselves. When authorities consider that prices are too low, resulting in an unfair market, minimum prices are established to assist producers whose price cannot go below the minimum once they have been set. The greatest price at which goods and services can be offered are known as price ceiling. What we can learn from the impacts of this Russia-Ukraine war is to be prepared for the future by not being fully dependent on import of certain products and taking the initiative to produce on our own. For example, our country faced a shortage of agricultural products that disrupted the production of food. Therefore, to prevent this from happening in the future, we need to come up with a new initiative to produce our own agricultural products. In order to turn the current agricultural model into a sustainable one, the Malaysian government needs to adopt a new development mindset and extensive planning. This will allow us to enhance food production despite increasingly limited land and energy resources, improve farmer well-being, and effect positive environmental changes. Aside from that, it is advisable for the locals to plan overseas trips wisely to avoid being trapped in high-cost or unexpected situations such as a sudden notice of travel restriction in a country. The government may implement an initiative to attract locals to just travel in the country itself, as it will help to recover the economy by helping the local travel agency and airline industry to gain profit from local travelers and to avoid locals from spending their income in other countries instead of their own country.